This is John Nugent.
I'm Ron Peters.
And I'm Sam Long.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After Class. Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. As the weather begins to turn, we have a new season here at Great Lakes. It's the Assassin season.
A lot of death on campus.
We play a game. I'm not the only ones in the world who play the game, but where people try to they don't say kill anyone. They say
Eliminate?
No.
Tag?
No. I'm talking about on the social medias, which I don't
gotcha.
don't use harsh word like not like I don't know. Anyway,
Delifify?
it's something silly like that. We do it here where you get a sticker with someone's name on it, and you take that sticker, and when they are unawares, you put it on their upper back, and if it sticks on their upper back, you have killed them. It's to limit too much violence, right. And anyway, so it's ongoing, and people have died already.
And it's a full campus thing this year more than in the past.
Yeah.
Because they had a pretty sweet promo video of like fails and
Not allouds.
Yeah, not allouds. And then Simon did an announcement, one of our student life folk, and like most of our administrators are playing. At least half to 2/3 of our faculty are playing, a bunch of staff, and a bunch of students.
Yeah, there's a lot of taunting of the students. Like, you guys are not good at this game. And they're not good. They're not as smart as I think they are. So we'll see if they can come up with something better.
For us, that means a lot of coming and going through non-traditional entrances and
Right.
exits.
Which I observed earlier today.
I won't be playing ping pong in the student mall for a while.
Yeah.
Because that's leaves you completely exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be definitely diversifying my comings and goings.
Yes.
And the first person who tries is going to get me. I'm willing to take maybe 5-6 steps at high speed to evade someone, but I'm not going to do a sprint across the parking lot. It's not worth it.
I remember last year there was a soccer young lady who was playing on the soccer team, and she couldn't understand why I was outrunning her. Like, I may be old, but I'm not that old.
Like decrepit. You got some long legs there, man.
That's right. We just keep going.
Good moving fast. This game's been around a long time. I remember reading about it back in the early 80s. Yeah, I was still in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean not here, but that exists in the world?
Yeah,
Okay.
the first time I ever saw it, it was talking about this new game that's going around these campuses, and back then, students were using the suction cup dart guns.
Oh, yeah.
And they had to shoot each other with those, and it had to stick and stuff like that. But I just remember thinking it was a really fascinating game. So this has been.
Did you
40
follow this
years
on
ago.
Community?
Yeah.
That show? Oh, that was great.
Well, they used paintball. Their
Yeah.
paintball episodes were epic.
Oh, my
But-
goodness.
Yeah, when I was a student here, we did it. We played, and we had 3 different ways you could die: shooting a poison or a bomb.
Mailbox bombs.
Yeah, all sorts of things. So I assume that's because of events in our culture since then. Perhaps those would not be as appropriate, but
Right,
you know,
Yeah. Well, it's been 24 hours, and Sam and I are still alive.
that's right.
Ron is still uninterested.
I am an interested spectator, not an interested participant, but I'm a very interested spectator. Yeah, there are going to be some fun moments along the way.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, it's a fun time on campus. It's a lot of crazies. All right. Speaking of crazy, we are going to transition to a 1-episode series.
Mm-hmm.
We like to, in between series, kind of throw in some movie reviews.
Yep.
And there's not a movie we want to do this week, but we do want to review what is a very fresh, recently released series on Amazon Prime called House of David.
Mm-hmm.
And House of David seems to be, it looks like it's set up to be a multi-season kind of deal.
I think so. I really do think so.
But as far as we can tell by looking on our streaming services, there's already 8 episodes.
8?
Yeah, 8
Well,
are
there's
mapped.
8 total.
Oh,
4
yeah,
that's been
yeah.
released.
8 are
Yeah.
mapped out for the season.
Yep.
4 have been released.
Gotcha.
And it looks like this first season is framed by the David and Goliath incident. It starts out with a scene from this, and then it's going to end by finishing the scene.
Yeah.
And then, the 8 episodes are really telling the backstory to David and Goliath encounter.
Yeah, and it's called House of David. If it ends with Goliath, it makes no sense. There is no House of David when that happens. So yes, I'm assuming they're going to go as long as they have money. I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, and as long as that people are subscribing to Amazon to watch it.
Right.
If Amazon sees this as something that keeps eyes focused on their streaming service, they're going to keep it going. So, yeah.
Thus the money.
Yep.
Always follow the money trail. That tells you all you need to know.
Yeah. So in preparation, we didn't want to wait till the whole thing was over. We want to give them some good publicity, like, hey, like this is
Maybe,
out.
if
It's
it's
kind of
any good.
fresh.
If it's good, yeah.
And usually we review movies that are like decades old. Hey, go check out this old Samson movie.
Right.
But this would be like one that's kind of current and fresh, and maybe we'll recruit some people. We get no kickbacks, just to
Yeah.
be clear.
We tried. They said no.
Did we?
No, we did not.
Oh, your podcast.
Our
that has
efforts
1,000
at advertising
downloads.
we've been all talk, no action. Let's be real about that.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, we watched the first 2 episodes in preparation for this, and we're going to talk about what happened in it. Like, if you want to encounter these fresh without any spoilers, then stop now, go watch it, and then
Come
go
back.
listen to us after episode 2. And we're just going to introduce people to what's going on in these episodes, what kind of new, literary creativity and license they wrote into the script, some neat features of it, and talk about how it matches up in relationship to the text.
Yeah.
Like how faithfully does it carry out and represent the scriptures. So were you going to try to at least tell us big picture, Sam, what's going on in the first 2 episodes?
I'm going to try. See, the problem was I watched the 3rd episode, and we have to be careful I don't go into that episode. But anyway, so as you said, it begins with the whole Goliath confrontation, and it gets you up to a certain point, and then it stops, and then we go back in time. All right, and it's basically filling in. There's not a lot of material on this David person until he gets anointed as king, and so this kind of fills in some gaps. It's meant to give you some background on the Saul family and the David family, and things that we don't always think about. Like David had brothers. All we think about is brothers. Like, oh, they didn't get picked, and there was David. Well, no, there were interactions, and he had a father, and so it kind of gives a little of the background to David is kind of the runt of the litter. And there are other things at play. I wouldn't mind talking about that at some point.
Oh,
Yeah, I agree.
And then, so it gives you a little bit of that background, but also the Saul side, where it's already jumped in where it doesn't do his anointing. It doesn't do kind of how he rose to fame, although it casts him as being a very popular king.
Yeah.
Right. The people like him. They're pro Saul. Things are going well, but it mostly begins with the when they fight the Amalekites and that victory, which was a really big victory, and it was framed as finally we get these people off our backs. But as we know, as the biblical readers, that he didn't do it according to the instructions, right? He was supposed to completely wipe them out. He left the king alive and those sorts of things. And so it's setting the stage for like, okay, there's going to be a conflict, and where is Saul in the timeline? And that where Saul is he's basically at his peak.
Yeah.
And it's all downhill from here, right? And it's kind of like the fall of Saul and the rise of David. This is where we're beginning the story in these first 2 episodes.
Yeah, and I think that they want to really begin to ratchet up the tension between the 2 characters. And so great storytelling gets you involved in the characters' lives. Like, you have to care about them as people. You got to be emotionally involved. And that's like the first thing I would say about it is they're doing a very good job of setting up David, setting up Saul and the 2 families to create narrative tension in the storyline and draw you in. And that's why they're going to have to go beyond the text, right?
Yes.
They can't just go with the text. That would, I hate to say it, but it'd be a boring TV show. And so they've got to give us more, which means they're going to take some literary licenses in order to tell a compelling story.
And they, at the very beginning of every episode, they have a little disclaimer.
Right, yeah.
Like, this is biblically based, but, we have to do other things. And that's fine.
Well, I think that's a good thing because I think there are at least some people involved with the project who are believers. And they want people to know this is not a word-for-word description of what happens in the Bible. And as long as they're upfront about that and being honest with it, then I think that's really good. You see a little bit of that in, like, The Chosen.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
that
I was
same
thinking the same.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to find the background to these first few episodes, and I think this includes episode 3, It's mostly Samuel, 1 Samuel 15, 16. 17 is the David and Goliath, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't go beyond 17, kind of starts with 17, goes back. But that's where you're going to find the heart of where David loses, or Saul loses the kingship, and David kind of rises in prominence in the king's court, which happens a lot in episode 3, which Ron and I haven't seen yet.
But I will soon.
Yeah. So as far as ways into the content, I think maybe we'll talk about, what are we getting in this telling that's new? Like that's not like where are they creating stuff that's not clear in the text?
That's a good question. If you have something, go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump right into that. The very first thing that we get that's new is a lot of detail about David and his relationship with his brothers and his dad. In this story, David is maybe help me on this because I don't think I've picked it up yet. But he's either a half brother to the other brothers, like his mom is not their mom, or he's not biologically Jesse's son. But I don't think that's right. I think he's biologically Jesse's son.
Yeah. Early on, they used language of bastard son.
Exactly.
Correct.
Is he being treated like one, or is he actually doesn't?
Yeah.
We don't know who his father is.
So I 100% had this question, like, what are you talking about? In all my studies, I've never, there's nothing that seems to indicate that David was not like a full brother.
Right.
Well, it's in the Mission on the Talmud, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I had to do some
Okay.
research to find
Wow.
it. So, again, he's a perceived bastard, and it's based on a midrash that suggests that Jesse had David with a foreign servant, and so that comes out.
okay.
But this midrash says it was actually a switcheroo, like Leah and Jacob, where he was supposed to have a relationship with his foreign servant, but then the real wife, the real mother, got in at the last minute. So David is actually their full brother, but they don't know it. Now, I don't know how that happens when she gives birth to a kid, but I'm just saying like what I found.
Oh, wow. That's
so-
fascinating.
And she stays quiet. The real mom, who's the mom of all the boys, stays quiet the whole time, and they think that David is a half brother from this other woman.
Okay. That is fascinating.
So even in that telling, Jesse's the dad.
Yes.
Okay, so that much is preserved, and that's not very clear.
I agree. Yeah.
And when I watched it, I came away saying, how is he not, from Jesse? Like his lineage and that connection to Boaz is
Kind of
kind
important.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So why would they go away from that? So apparently they don't. It's more on the mom.
Yes. And I didn't read the actual midrash. I read a summary of it, so I could be getting it all wrong, but I feel pretty good. It was something in that direction.
Well, and I wonder if David's mom is a concubine, not a wife, and that's
Right.
why he gets the title of a bastard, because the older brothers, their mom was married to Jesse and everything's legal and all that, but Jesse takes David's mom as a concubine, and so that calls into question the legitimacy of his relationship to Jesse in some legal sense, not biological sense.
All right. So when I was watching this, I watched the first episode twice. And
Oh,
I think what stood out to me is I feel like Jesse has a special relationship to this woman. She didn't seem to me like a second-rate wife.
Yeah.
Right. I think she's the real mom of all the boys. Right. But
Jesse really loves her,
Yes.
and he ostracizes David because he partially blames David for her death. Well,
Right.
not
Right, yeah.
partially.
He
What
does
did
blame-
you do?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you do?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if it was a concubine situation, I don't feel like they're building off of that.
Well, that's what I just did. I want some more information. I want to know definitively the nature of, David's relationship to Jesse and his mom's relationship and then the other brothers. It's still kind of nebulous, and I want some more.
Yeah, the way the midrash does talk about it is though the mom, both the real mom, doesn't ever say anything. So they all think he's a bastard son, but she knows he's her son and treats him like a son, but doesn't ever say anything. Because on some level it's like kind of hiding Jesse's shame because he had sex with this other woman.
But do you think there's enough in the story, in the movie, to say that's what they're doing?
No, that's not clear at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, this makes no sense to me why they would even view him in this way. Like, it goes beyond the runt of the litter. It's
right.
like it's not just you're the youngest and the most annoying. You're not even our full brother, and
Right.
that comes out, but you don't know why.
Yeah.
At least from the biblical perspective.
Yeah. Well, and his mom is a really interesting character because we only get her in flashbacks.
Yeah.
But number one, she really loves the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Her commitment to Yahweh is indisputable. And she's a prophet, it sounds like.
Yep.
She has visions and things like that and gets words from God. And so there's something about her where she has this elevated role within God's economy in Israel. And so she's a very admirable character. And her love for David is undeniable. She teaches him music and all that. So why is David a musician? Well, he gets it from his mom, both by birth and her own instructions.
Yeah. And so there's at least one scene where other people in the tribe of Judah look down on her. Like they give her a hard time, and
Right,
maybe
yeah.
they think maybe because of her visions she's some kind of medium, or like it's not legit. Like there's something sketchy going on, and she has to like put one of them in their place.
Yeah, basically, history will forget you, but it'll remember my son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is this weird dynamic. I think, and wherever they're getting it from, it's intentionally showing the mom and David are thought less of course, than to when he's chosen as king. There's this big reversal that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But for the moment, they're really pressing that idea and minimizing their sort of acceptability among the tribe.
Well, and I think it's good writing because it creates this sense of tension. Like whenever you have a character and you know what's going to happen, that removes any opportunity for tension. Like he's not going to die at Goliath's hands. And so there's no narrative tension. Well, how do you introduce it? You've got to bring other elements in there that create the tension in the story. And so for David and his mom to somehow be outcast in their own society creates the necessary tension to propel the story forward. And that's why I'm wondering, is she, at least according to this telling of it, is she a concubine or something like that makes people look down on her? Or a former slave or something along that lines that make people just hold her at arm's length.
Yeah, what is interesting about her being a musician prophet, which is obviously not in the text, is in Saul's backstory, he is among the musician prophets.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that's, they don't ever work anything into the plot line about that.
Right.
Did you pick up that at all
Nope.
in the third episode?
Not.
Yeah. So like he has this background that the text totally ignores, and then you see it in David's mom. And that's where David gets his, unique, heart for the Lord, a man after God's own heart. It's from his mom, and his music ability, it's from his mom. And so, yeah, this is obviously literary license, but it doesn't. It makes sense,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't detract from the story. It just kind of adds backstory that we don't really have to kind of beef up the plot line. And yeah, like you, Ron, I think they use it pretty effectively.
Yeah, I do too. I think that they do a fantastic job of helping us really get involved in the characters. Having extended pieces of dialogue that is really robust, it helps you get emotionally involved. Like I'm getting to know them. So many TV shows, the characters are there, but you don't feel like you get to know anything about them. And I think they've done a very good job just in 2 episodes of helping the viewer know David and his mom. And other characters we're going to talk about later. I think they're doing a great job as writers and as directors of bringing it to the screen.
Yeah. Another character they really beef up in the storyline is the lion.
The old king? So they call him the old king?
Oh,
Yeah.
right, the old king, yeah. Because, David said, I've killed a lion and a bear, and that's about all you know about him. But
Right.
now we get to meet the lion.
So apparently there's this lion that lurks about the village of Bethlehem,
Yeah.
right, in Judah. And he's a menacing figure on the scene. And, we first meet this lion when David is out being a shepherd and watching sheep, and he hears bleating and crying in the background, and there's this injured lamb, and apparently there's 3 other dead ones somewhere else, or 4. And he comes back to the village, and so there's this like lion, and we learn later on that this lion, who is a big deal and comes to haunt the village, was instrumental in killing David's mom. And this sets up David's outcast status, I feel like, the most. Like, there was some level that him and his mom were outcasts before anything happened. But because, David is kind of goes out from the house in the settlement beyond the walls or beyond the fence or wherever where he's not supposed to be. And he's a boy at this point, right?
Yep.
And he sees the lion in the background. And then you're like, he's kind of nervous. What is the lion going to do? He's got like blood, He's
On his
like
mouth,
he's always got blood on his beard, and his lion
Whiskers.
mane. And so, but before you know it, his mom's there comforting him. Okay, David, just stay still. Don't show fear. And the lion's like about to pounce. Like, you can tell he wants action. And the mom starts sprinting as a diversion. Here, lion, follow me.
Yep.
So that David runs so he can get away. And then what happens?
Yeah, the lion attacks mom, and she doesn't die right away. Jesse's able to come out and find her broken body and take her back. But she's mortally wounded, and so she dies in the household. She has some final words for David. And Jesse, having lost David's mom, wife, concubine, whatever she is, in his grief over that, basically says to David, this is all your fault. You're the one who did this. You went beyond he doesn't say it, but the implication is you went beyond the wall. You disobeyed your mom. She's dead, and I've lost this woman I love because of you. And that gives us more insight into the nature of their relationship and all that.
Yeah, and then he's assigned to the fields for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it's kind of like he's banished. Banished to be a shepherd, while his brothers, who are not banished, become impressive warriors in the army of Saul.
Yeah. And at least one of them is a very impressive warrior, as we see in episode 2.
Yeah, and you guys ever seen the movie Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer? It's back in the early 2000s, maybe. It reminds me of that, like this one line that's killed, like just totally, terrorizes a village, and finally someone's got to come and take care of it. And of course, that someone is David. Eventually,
he does take care of it.
Yeah, and yet the whole time, just like, no, stay away from that thing. Like, no, we need to kill it. His dad just seems very reluctant to kill the lion. And Dave's like, no, it needs to be taken care of. And finally, he does.
It's like he failed to do it. Like, David accuses him of not doing the job.
Right.
And then David has to do it.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. It was an interesting way to kind of wrap up the mom and the lion and David to establish a few things we know about David. He killed an animal. And he's pretty brave, in conflict situations. And he's also kind of ostracized at some level. He stays home when all the brothers go out to war. So they did a good job developing it, I think.
Yeah, I do too. I don't think there's anything about those additions that undermine the biblical story. We've already alluded to it. There's a part of me that looks at him not being a full brother, and maybe it'll change, but not being a full brother, it's like, okay, that's a little bit of license, but I don't think it destroys the story. Sometimes you're watching an adaptation of a biblical story and you're like, oh my gosh, that is just ridiculous. No, I don't think this is ridiculous. It's all right.
Yeah. The first episode, if we're going to talk about how faithful it is to the text, I felt like the first episode drifted more. Like, there's just a lot more new stuff that's not in the story. But I feel like by the time we got into the second episode, it was ridiculously close to the script.
They're trying harder. Well, yeah, or there's...
direct quotes. Like, people are saying stuff straight out of the Bible and everything, because I picked up on that as well.
Yeah. Should we talk about the first Goliath scene?
Sure.
Where sets up the tension you're talking about. Like, the first scene ends with David on the ground with a spear in him.
Yeah. And it's like his side. It didn't go like in him, but like hit him in the side, and you see this blood on his side, and he's laying on the ground. It's like, well, I don't remember that happening.
Yeah. And the whole thing is like, can a stone change history or something like that? I forget what this quote is. And so, yeah, that's not what the biblical narrative says happened. Right, but they're like, oh, for me, it's like, well, now I got to watch all the way through, see how they turn this thing around, which maybe it's just like, oh, he's wounded, but not mortally wounded, and he gets up and does what he's got to do. I don't know, but it's like, I did not expect that right from the outset. And that's what, like you said, kind of turned me out from the first episode. Like, are we just going to keep making crap up the whole time, or are we going to actually get to the story? And so... Yeah, I go back and forth. Like, oh, some of the stuff they're filling in is interesting and could be true and is helpful. That I'm like, come on, what are we doing here?
Yeah, if the second episode continued like the first, I don't know. I may have been put off by it, but I feel like the second episode redeemed it. Do you feel like the third one continued the redemption track, or they start getting
There's
little-
both.
much filler?
There's both. There's something that happens. I'm like, interesting. You'll see when you get there.
All right, now I got to watch it. That might be my late night viewing tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can. Yeah, we can. I guess describe the Goliath scene. Like it starts out normal.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's
Like they're in camp,
Goliath
yep.
taunting the camp,
Yep.
and then the Israelites all chicken, and then David's like Goliath,
And he runs out. Yeah.
He's got his sling and his stones, and he runs out. And you're like, all right, he's going to whip it out and peg the guy between the eyes. That's
Yeah,
what you're
exactly.
expecting to happen.
Right.
Except instead he gets quasi impaled by a sword.
Goliath starts chugging spears at him.
Yeah, the first couple miss, but the third one hits him in the side, and it's like, what's going to
So-
happen to David?
Did you guys experience this? Like when they first had Goliath walking up, it's like he was a giant. He was taller than the men around him.
I couldn't stand it.
But then like as he got into like the confrontation with David, he got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Like, he looked like a jolly green giant.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah.
He's like 20 feet tall. When
Right.
he's standing next to the Philistines, he's easily twice their height.
Yeah.
Easily. And and he's got this voice that's all like digitized, like roar, roar, like
it reminded me of Andre the Giant.
a little bit.
I think they were kind of channeling that sound.
Yeah.
Or,
And he like the text says 9 or 6 feet tall. And he clearly exceeded that. And maybe that's part of their artistic license to make him seem massive. But it was just a little over the top for me.
yeah,
And
and
a
there's
little bit, yeah, I agree.
there's this city that was recently ravaged by the Philistines that's up north or along the border,
Yeah.
right, of Saul's territory, I guess. And they have this, is it Gath? No, Hazor.
Katzor?
Yeah, it was that. Was
I
that
don't
the
remember.
city?
I don't remember them saying it. I just remember
I
them saying
think
a
they
border
did,
town.
and there's lots
Okay.
of like fire and burning, which
Yeah.
actually matches with the, I don't know, archaeological evidence today.
Kind of.
But anyway, there's this like handprint
Yeah.
of Goliath 30 feet up on a building.
Exactly.
Like he just stretched up and left his mark. And then, character runs up the ladder and puts their hand in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, looks like tiny.
Baby's hand and an adult's hand.
So they may be exaggerating his size.
You think just a smidge?
Just a wee bit.
Yeah. There are a couple of different measurements in the Bible about his height, and they well exceed the bigger of the two.
Well, I mean, you figured the average Philistine was probably, a male was 5 feet or a little bit above 5 feet. I mean, people were just short back then. And so even if he was 6 feet tall, like if he was the height of me or Sam, that would seem like a giant in those days because just the average people are so short. But if
I mean,
he's
I'm
9
presuming
feet tall-
that Philistines in general were taller because they come from the sea from up north, and they're probably more like European in origin rather than Semitic.
Yeah, but even Europeans, like, have you ever gone to a museum and look at the suits of armor and you're like, man, those suits of armor are so small? It's just because people weren't tall back then. And so even the sea people, like the Mediterranean folk, it's not like they were a bunch of 6-footers. Guys were probably 5.5 feet tall at the tallest.
Can I bring up a point of dissent and frustration at this
Sure.
point?
Yeah.
So this border village, town, city that got burned and attacked by the Philistines is framed as being like a stone-walled city.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't have that. It was too early in their history to have that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so, like, okay, again, artistic license where they're coming in and having to knock down walls and get over. Like, no, it was probably like a brush wall that they just knocked out of the way and came in. Pause. I'm just saying stuff like that, or like, I wish you'd be a little more attentive to detail. Is it as good of a story? Like, no, but it's not medieval ages where we have to go over a 30-foot
Right.
stone wall. That's not where we're at.
Yeah.
So that's just an aside.
But to your point, one of the things that I noticed at the very beginning is that there are a lot of visuals that I think are actually really, really great, not because they're historically accurate, but they're kind of gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the big panoramic scenes of cities and stuff, it reminds me of some really great like fantasy movies or something like that, where you just have these really, really elegant, beautiful scenes. And they've invested some money because these are not sets. This is CGI stuff.
Yeah, right.
And so they've really invested some money to make these really beautiful scenes. And then whenever they have a name, how it starts out in Hebrew and then
Oh,
it
yeah.
like fades into English, That's a great effect. I love that. It's like, man, that's really, really cool. So they're doing some things. They're throwing money at this series because evidently they believe in it. And I think it's really paying off. Whoever is doing this stuff is doing a great job. So like I said, Sam, you're right.
Thank you.
It's not historically accurate, but
It's pretty.
It meets the cool factor, and that's
fine.
I like that.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the what do they call it when they do subtitles on the screen? Like
Yeah,
I don't know, like
subtitle.
just to introduce. There's a new scene. You're now in this city,
Yeah.
like Bethlehem, or this city, or that city. And it is interesting. They start out with the Hebrew name, and then it kind of fades into the English.
Yeah.
I just wish they left the Hebrew name out there a second
A little bit
longer.
longer. Yep.
Because like I'm reading the first word and I'm translating on the fly, and they switch before I can get to the second one.
Pause.
Yeah. So just a second longer, and
Yeah.
us with people with Hebrew skills could actually have time to read it. But it's a nice effect.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, not that we have it, but like you talk about the visuals of it. It reminds me very much of like the movie The 300. It's
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of dark and gray and grainy, but it's still very like well done.
Yeah.
And so it definitely gave me that vibe.
Yep.
That's sort of the visuals of it.
And it's very believable. I think that's for a modern person, again, not people who know their history, but for a modern person just looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, I can totally see that city or that village existing in that context or whatever. And that's another cool thing is the actors are for the most part people who look like they could be Philistines or ancient Israelites. These are not a bunch of white people going around playing like they're Israelites. That their accents and all of that sound like ancient Israelites, at least to the best of our knowledge of what those people looked and sounded like. And I think that's actually a great choice as well, because that adds more believability to it.
Speaking of how people look, David, the character in the show, has very dark hair, very Semitic looking.
Yeah.
Right? Dark skin, larger nose. But how is he ruddy?
Very good question. Yeah, where does the ruddiness?
But
come
again,
from?
we don't even know what that even means. So how are they going to portray it? But
He's
I saw-
kind of got a baby face.
if that's what you think ruddy means,
He's kind of like when you think of. It seems like the way he's portrayed in Samuel is kind of like the difference between Jacob and an Esau. Like his brother's got thick, rugged, warrior-looking beards, and he's kind of a, stay-at-home mama's boy, smooth
pretty
face. Yeah, I think that's
Should be a
their.
boy band.
I think that's their attempt.
maybe.
Their attempt to get at that aspect of the
Yeah.
story.
Because I don't know what it means. Doesn't mean he has red hair. Doesn't mean he has red flushed face a
Right.
lot. Doesn't what are we talking about here? I don't know, but that's his description, and I don't see how he's all that different. Other than like what you say, yes, he definitely is shaven and like clean face as opposed to his brothers who are big burly guys.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's their interpretation of the ruddy, which you can
Fair
go
enough.
in different directions.
Yeah. So one thing did you remember the scene where they were doing the slingshots?
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, where he gets two
Yes.
Yeah.
bases with one stone.
And he's with his brothers, right?
Yeah.
And they made out that the brothers sucked at slingshotting, and he was good, and he was the only one who was good. That struck me as false for multiple reasons.
Okay.
On the one hand, like I think David honed his slingshotting skills being a shepherd, because what else do you do all day except throw stones and try to
Right.
hit that flower out there 50 feet away. Like I get that he honed his skills sitting there, but they're from the tribe of Benjamin, who are known as fighters, as good slingshotters, and as ambidextrous. Like the story of Ehud is like he was probably ambidextrous, not left-handed. That has part of to do with the whole story. And again, they were known for being slingshotters. So I feel like in an attempt to again elevate David, they made his brothers out to be less than, when in fact they probably were equally skilled, if not better, being warriors.
Yeah. Well, I think their attempt at getting that is at the end of the second episode. There is a skirmish between David, his big brother, and the Philistines, and his brother is a beast with the sword.
Oh,
For
my
sure.
gosh.
So I think their take on it is the brothers are beasts with the sword, and David's kind of good with the slingshot, and so
Yeah.
that plays upon slingshot. Like in American culture, is a little boy's toy with the rubber band and a little thing. Not like at that time that was a serious weapon.
Yeah.
So I think they kept that trope going.
Yeah.
He's good with the boy toy. They're big with the swords.
And
And they
he's-
were. David seemed to be nothing in that battle with the Philistines.
Oh,
His
right.
brother cleaned house.
Yeah. And that was this is another area where I just think they really invested some money, because it's not like he's just running around stabbing people. Like, he's fighting, but his speed and his skill just give him this advantage, so that every guy he meets after, a few seconds, he can dispatch them. And that's obviously very Hollywood. That's not how real battle works. As a guy, I have to admit it's kind of cool to watch, because it's just really, really well done. And you have this real admiration for, is it Eliab? Is that his?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
At the end of that, I'm like, wow, Eliab, you're pretty cool. Your brother can, like, when he's flinging stones, it's fast and it's accurate. It's like, that is really cool. But his brother with the sword is really cool. And then the other two brothers, like, the one's kind of wimpy and the other one's in the middle. But older brother, man, this guy is awesome.
Yeah, they draw a lot of attention to him, and he didn't stand out that much to me in like my previous readings of Samuel. But when I went back to read afterwards, and 1 Samuel 16 does draw a lot of attention to Eliab, right? It says when they came, and this is when Samuel anoints David, and he passes by the brothers first. But when he came, Samuel looked upon Eliab and thought, "Surely his anointed is now before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look upon his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." So, like, he's built up here as the picture perfect. That's the guy you would want to be king.
Yeah.
And so the show does a good job of making him truly impressive.
And I think that he's impressive in a way that the TV show says of Saul, because there's a scene where Saul and Jonathan are sword fighting together. And Jonathan has, over the course of the storytelling, you've seen that he's a really great fighter. He's got the military prowess. But then he gets in a fight with his dad, and his dad just kicks his butt.
Yeah, he crushes him.
Yeah. And so I think what you're saying, John, is really good, that you see in Saul and in Eliab that same kind of guy. That's really good. Good job to whoever wrote that, because now when Samuel does show up and he sees Eliab, he's like, here's a guy like the guy we're getting rid of. Hopefully he just loves God more. And God says, you're looking at the wrong stuff. Even you, Samuel, are falling into the wrong way of thinking.
Yeah, and I don't know how this is going to work out, because I feel like next in the story, it's time for Samuel to show up and anoint David, like in episode 3. It's like I haven't seen it yet. Sam has. That's what you're expecting to happen next. But season 2 ends with Eliab almost mortally wounded. So
Episode 2.
Episode 2, yeah. Like, so I don't know how he's going to make that turnaround to be that impressive looking person when Samuel shows up. I don't know. Do they deal with that?
Not really. He doesn't die. Spoiler.
I didn't think he would.
But the anointing scene is interesting.
Yeah.
Like how Samuel goes up to each of them and how he tries to figure out who's the right one. And then when he encounters David, I think you'll find it interesting.
Does he throw the bones?
He does not throw. He doesn't do the Yerman Thummim. Anyway, so I won't. I'll let you watch it fresh, but it's interesting.
Yeah,
I kind of liked it.
Cool. I'll look forward
We
to
have about 7 minutes left. And we haven't talked much about Saul, so I feel like we have to transition to talk a little bit about Saul, and we have sort of by
Not the House of Saul.
talking about him, and I was impressed. I was taken aback by how warrior skilled Jonathan was.
Yeah.
Like, I just, from when I read the Bible, that doesn't stand out to me. Like, I feel like David is the one, and but like this one has him being really, really a boss guy until he has to fight his dad or Abner.
I mean, on the one hand, he does go off on that battle.
That's what I was saying.
alone.
He's serving. Yeah.
But it's you're right. He doesn't get a lot of play except for that one little scene. But yeah, he's definitely shown to be the heir who's going to come and be like his dad.
Yeah, he's a big deal in this movie, and that makes what happens in the story. I mean, biblically, when it ends up being David and not Jonathan, like, yeah, that's a bigger, upset expectation, I think, in this storyline than it shows up in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting to me is I never thought about it, but David is young. Jonathan's much older.
Oh yeah.
Like I never thought their ages. When it said they were friends and hung out, I'm thinking, oh, they're the same age. They're 18, palling around. Like, and I never did the math. I don't know if it's right or not, but the way the show is framing it, like, I mean, I don't know how old's Jonathan. Probably in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, and David's like 16. You know.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how he's going to endear himself to Jonathan.
Yeah. That'll be interesting. Well, we may not see it this season, right? That's before that happens.
Yeah,
right.
that's true.
Yeah.
But-
yeah, maybe next season.
Anyway, so yeah, that was a startling sort of thing to me. Like, oh, if you were to put them side by side, which hasn't happened yet, probably will soon. Like their ages are very disparate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the best effects, or at least most interesting effects that I saw in episode 2, was when Samuel tells Saul that God rejects him as king,
Yeah.
and you have Saul descending into madness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they use some visual effects. It's like you get to see the world from Saul's now distorted perspective.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
It was good, and it reminded me a little bit of like Lord of the Rings. Like when somebody puts the ring on,
Yeah.
you get that
yeah.
same distorted effect. It's not to the same degree in House of David, but that's immediately where I went. It's like they use that same kind of filtering effect to create this very disjointed view of the world that now is going to define Saul.
Well, and I don't want to, but chapter 3 talks, or episode 3 talks more about it being a curse. And I find that fascinating. Like, it's one thing for the Spirit of God to leave him, but they all view it as a curse that we need to give reversed. And they're going to,
Okay.
there's a lot good dealing with episode 3. And so, like, oh, yeah, it would be a cursing type of thing, but I've never really thought about it in that way. I just thought, like, now God's Spirit, God's presence, God's influence is no longer with Saul.
Do you
Yeah.
think that came off of their portrait of the king of Agag? Like he is this weird
Yeah.
dude that they have
Like cannibal.
captive. Yeah, they like to eat people apparently,
Yeah.
and but he is like writing little curses in the sand, and like
Got the eye with like the white,
I know,
a lot of
right?
white. There's a lot of weird. Yeah, maybe.
it looked like he was like up to something, even though he was in chains. He was somehow putting a hex on Saul's family. Maybe one of his daughters got creeped out by him. And so I wonder if that's where they're going with this curse thing, because Samuel doesn't use curse.
But they
language.
blame Samuel.
Okay, huh.
So that's
It's all
what's
your
interesting.
fault.
They do. They
I
Way
mean,
to go, Sam.
I mean, he is the turning point.
yeah. So it's just, but I think it's fascinating because I mean, like we say, they view everything as coming from God on some level, good, bad, ugly. It's all God, and so they bring that in the show, which I appreciate. And so yeah, that scene was very fascinating because then it's definitely downhill for Saul from here on out.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you get to know more of Saul's family. You have Jonathan, you have Michal, but you meet his wife, who we really don't see in the biblical text. One other son, one other daughter, neither of whom are likable characters. They're not horrible, but the one son's more of a party dude. The other daughter's kind of like a valley girl. It's like, but then you have Jonathan, who is very noble of character. And Jonathan is another person who cares a lot about the Lord. And he cares a lot about Samuel, even more so than his dad. He sees Samuel as the voice of God, and he respects that.
And that annoys Saul.
Yeah.
Saul doesn't like his respect for Samuel because Samuel has become a thorn in Saul's side.
Exactly. And that's going to create family tension, which is also good writing. When you have a family, but there's divided loyalties, that is how you get drawn in. It's like, what's going to happen next? And how are they going to resolve this? Good job to the writers. You're thinking about what makes a compelling story within a TV show.
And that feature is in the biblical story.
It is, yeah.
That same divided loyalty with Jonathan siding with David over Saul. Like, that's right there in the biblical story.
And even Michal eventually siding with David at some point. So, yeah. I mean, that's a good way to sort of bring, like, they've done really good research. I think they mostly get the biblical story, and they get the trying to bring out these tensions and these dramas that will bring people in.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go a little further than I would, but I'm not a Hollywood writer, so that's right.
Yeah, this is a show that's got my attention, and I've been watching it for a few weeks. I'll go into Amazon, and I'll see it there. I'm like, man, I got to check out this House of David. So when we decided we were going to talk about it, it's like, all right, I got to get in there and watch it. But after 2 episodes, I'm in. I like it. I think that for the most part, it honors the biblical text, and I think that some of the writers clearly want to honor God. You see that in David and his mom, and Jonathan, in Samuel, that God comes up a lot, and these heroes of the story, part of what makes them heroic is their commitment to God, and that really comes through strongly. As a believer watching the show, I don't think they're taking me away. I think that they're going in the right direction.
Yeah, I was super skeptical because I saw the preview and it's like this epic retelling. I'm like, oh no. And after the first episode, I was very skeptical. It's growing on me. I think by the end I'll be okay with it, but might have to go back and rewatch it from the beginning. But I'm more positive than I expected to be. I'm not all in yet, though.
Sure. I get it.
Yeah. I, having watched the first episode twice, the first time I watched it, I was not a fan. And I was partly falling asleep, so it
I fell asleep.
that didn't help.
Yeah.
But no, I was fully awake rewatching it, and like I said, the second episode really started redeeming the worst parts of what I thought was the first episode. So we'll see how it goes, and maybe if there are enough interesting developments between here and the final episode of season 1, maybe we'll come back with an episode later on,
follow-up.
like a follow-up, what we thought of it, having watched the whole thing. But in the meantime, this gives you a sense, if you weren't thinking of watching it, and you probably have 3 people here that would say, yeah, give it a try.
Yeah, check it out.
And but
There's worse things to be watching.
For
Yeah.
real.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, thank you for joining us for this episode of the After Class podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen.
After class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Audio editing and mixing is done by Drew Nyquist. Episode images and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris.